Imagine walking into a bedroom that has just been the site of a totally chaotic, brutal murder.
Right, the violence is just overwhelming.
Exactly. But then you look down at the floor, and sitting there, completely undisturbed, is the victim's clothing, perfectly, meticulously folded.
It's just such a bizarre juxtaposition.
It really is. And as you try to process that, you notice something even more disturbing. You walk into the home's only bathroom, and the shower is still wet.
Yeah, that detail always gets me.
I mean, the killer didn't just break in and flee. After committing this unspeakable act, they decided to take off their clothes, turn on the water, and bathe. So today, we're opening up a case file where the predator didn't just strike in the dark. They made themselves entirely at home.
We are pulling from a really comprehensive investigative case file today. It spans over 15 years regarding the unsolved murder of 19-year-old Brittany McGrone.
And the sources we're analyzing map out a highly complex timeline, right?
Yeah, in Winsboro, Texas, back in May of 2007. Our objective for this deep dive is to reconstruct that timeline and really examine the investigative psychology required when a crime scene suggests an alarming level of intimacy.
Because we are looking at a scenario where the suspect pool isn't some sprawling list of anonymous drifters.
No, not at all. The circle is terrifyingly, claustrophobically small.
Which is something you really need to keep in mind as we go through this. I mean, we are so conditioned by true crime to fear the stranger, right? Like the boogeyman picking the lock in the dead of night.
Absolutely.
But this deep dive is going to show you how the most dangerous threat is often someone sitting comfortably right within your own inner circle, just hiding in plain sight.
To really fully grasp the tragedy of what happened on May 4th, you have to understand the sheer exhaustion Brittany was operating under.
Yeah, the case file paints a picture of a young woman running on absolute fumes.
She was working an overnight shift at a Lowe's distribution center, and that alone is grueling physical labor. But to save up for nursing school, she actually worked a second job during the day at a local discount store called Alco.
Man, she was grinding. She had goals, and she was doing whatever it took to reach them.
She really was.
Typically, a schedule like that means your routine is sacred. You get off your overnight shift around 5 in the morning, you go straight to your own bed, and you crash.
But on this particular Friday morning, she made a slight deviation. She drove out to the country to sleep at her boyfriend's house instead.
And that single deviation from her routine became the tragic pivot point for the entire investigation.
It did. Her boyfriend, Jeff Stagner, lived in this modest one-story house with his mother, his stepdad, and his younger siblings. When Brittany arrived, the house was just starting to wake up.
Right, because Jeff and his stepdad had an errand to run. They needed to drive a couple of hours away to pick up Jeff's grandmother.
Exactly. So by 9 a.m., the men hit the road. And Brittany stayed behind in Jeff's bed, finally getting some uninterrupted sleep.
And the house is completely quiet until about 3:30 that afternoon.
Yeah, that's when Jeff and his stepdad pull back into the driveway.
They walk inside. Jeff goes into his bedroom, and he discovers Brittany dead. The transition from a mundane afternoon errand to an absolute nightmare is instantaneous.
The crime scene documentation from the Wood County Sheriff's deputies is incredibly grim, but those details construct an immediate behavioral profile of the offender.
She was completely naked, right?
Yes, she was. And the medical examiner concluded she had been bludgeoned to death with a heavy cylindrical object, the autopsy and the cast-off blood patterns on the wall.
The trails of blood flung from the weapon as it was raised repeatedly.
Right. All of that pointed to a tire iron or a crowbar. It was a very frenzied, forceful attack.
Yet, amidst all of that frenzy, you have this chilling neatness. We mentioned the folded clothes earlier. Her jeans and boots were resting on the floor exactly where she had left them when she changed out of her work clothes.
Investigators noted that specific detail because it contrasted so sharply with the violence on the bed. Jeff informed detectives that when Brittany went to sleep, she was wearing a t-shirt and underwear.
And they found the t-shirt near the bed.
They did. However, her underwear, specifically size 5 white underwear, was nowhere to be found. The killer took it.
That's just terrifying. And then the deputies check the bathroom, and they find clear evidence that someone had just taken a shower.
The shower is still wet.
I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a profiler looking at this. A panicked burglar who gets surprised by a sleeping homeowner does not stick around to strip down and use their soap.
No, they run.
Exactly. Lathering up while the victim you just murdered is in the next room implies a staggering level of arrogance. It's like a predator stopping to take a nap in the victim's living room. It says, I am not afraid of getting caught. I know exactly who is in this house, and I know exactly when they are coming back.
And that level of comfort immediately rules out a random crime of opportunity. Plus, the house wasn't ransacked, nothing of value was stolen.
So the psychological fingerprint points entirely to a localized, intimate attack. Who feels that at home here?
Naturally, the first rule of homicide investigation kicks in. You look at the person closest to the victim. You look at the boyfriend, Jeff, and the stepdad.
Right, the true crime reflex. The boyfriend is always suspect number one until proven otherwise.
Except in this case, they were proven otherwise almost immediately.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, detectives didn't just take their word for it. They retraced the men's route to pick up the grandmother. They pulled surveillance video from a convenience store along the highway.
Oh, that's smart.
And the time-stamped footage placed Jeff and his stepdad exactly where they said they were, hours away from the house at the time of the murder. Law enforcement officially cleared them.
Which totally changes the entire geometry of the investigation. If the people who live in the house didn't do it, and a random burglar didn't do it, the suspect list shrinks to the tiny handful of people who knew Brittany was in that specific bed on that specific Friday morning.
Investigators had to systematically look at the porous edges of that household. Like, who else had a reason to approach that property?
And that question led them to a man named Cody, right?
Yes. Cody operated as Jeff's marijuana dealer.
And they had a very specific, somewhat cliched system, didn't they? The classic fake rock, or in this case, a garden gnome.
Exactly, a garden gnome in the front yard. Jeff told detectives that before he left that morning, he tucked cash under the gnome for Cody.
Okay.
When Jeff returned at 3:30 to find the horrific scene inside, he also realized the money under the gnome was gone, but no marijuana had been left in its place.
Well, that immediately puts Cody at the scene of the crime on the day of the murder.
It does, but Cody's story was quite different. When police brought him in, he claimed Jeff had been blowing up his phone all morning, just pestering him about the delivery.
So what did he say happened?
Cody said he got annoyed, texted back, "Yes, I dropped it off," just to get Jeff to stop texting, but swore he never actually set foot on the property. He claims someone else must have found the cash.
I would imagine the detectives didn't just buy that excuse and send him on his way.
They definitely didn't. They administered a polygraph test, and Cody passed.
Okay, let's talk about polygraphs for a second, because I think people have a very skewed perception of them from television.
Oh, absolutely.
They aren't magical truth detectors.
Right.
They measure your sympathetic nervous system, right? Your heart rate, your blood pressure, your sweat gland activity. If you're lying, the theory is your body produces a stress response. But if Cody passes, does that mean the timeline is entirely blown open?
It creates a severe complication. Polygraphs are an investigative tool, not admissible evidence, precisely because they aren't foolproof. However, when an outer circle suspect like Cody passes and his cell phone pings don't contradict his story, investigators have to pivot.
They had to ask if there was a completely different motive they were missing.
And that brings us to the funeral, where a completely separate, horrifying narrative thread emerges.
The tension at a small-town funeral when a murder is unsolved is already suffocating. You have a community looking at each other, wondering if the killer is sitting in the third row.
And Brittany's sister, Hope, is standing there just trying to process the loss. And she is approached by their adopted grandfather, James McGlone.
He puts his arm around her, leans in, and asks this chilling question. He says, "Have you gone to see the body yet?"
That comment froze Hope in her tracks. Because she wasn't just grieving, she was carrying a devastating secret. Brittany had recently confided in Hope that James had been sexually abusing her for years.
A nightmare that began when she was a young girl. And the sources show this wasn't entirely a secret to the older generation either. Aunts later told investigators that James had been showing up at Brittany's workplaces, hovering around, making everyone incredibly uncomfortable.
He was reportedly very agitated. Brittany was getting older, she had a serious boyfriend, and James was losing his control over her.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Put yourself in the investigator's shoes here. You have an escalating predator who is terrified his victim is about to expose a lifetime of abuse. That is the textbook definition of a motive. If science and time cards clear the obvious suspects, aren't we just looking for a ghost at this point?
Well, from a psychological standpoint, it is the perfect motive. The threat of exposure drives so many intimate partner or familial homicides.
Right.
But this is where the friction between behavioral profiling and hard data occurs. Detectives pulled James McGlone's work records.
And what did they find?
The time cards from his employer were airtight. They definitively proved he was on the clock, at work, from 7 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. that day. He physically could not have committed the murder.
The psychological toll that must have taken on the family is just unbearable. They're forced to confront the reality that Brittany was surrounded by multiple men capable of extreme evil.
Exactly.
If the grandfather is cleared by time cards and the boyfriend is cleared by surveillance cameras, the detectives have to start looking for the invisible men in the background, the people who blend into the scenery.
That shift in focus lands squarely on a 25-year-old man named Chad Carr. Chad was dating Jeff's sister, Velva.
And Velva was still in high school at the time. Reading through the case notes, multiple people described her as potentially mentally vulnerable or easily manipulated. So right out of the gate, we are looking at a 25-year-old man targeting a vulnerable teenager. That tells us something about his baseline character.
It really does. Now, Chad barely knew Brittany. They didn't hang out. They didn't communicate. But crucially, he was one of the very few individuals who actually visited the property that morning.
Okay.
Jeff informed police that Chad stopped by around 8:30 in the morning to retrieve something for Velva. During that brief visit, Jeff and his stepdad explicitly instructed Chad not to go inside the house because Brittany was asleep in the bedroom.
Let's log those facts. Chad is explicitly told she is in the house. He is told she is asleep. And he watches the rest of the household pack up to leave. He has all the tactile information he needs.
Yes, he does, and his behavior for the rest of that day only compounds the suspicion. Later that afternoon, Chad picked Velva up. According to her later statements to the police, the moment he got in the car, he reeked of a highly specific scent.
Wait, let me guess.
Soft soap, ultra-rich shea butter.
Which happens to be Velva's body wash.
Yeah.
The exact soap kept in the bathroom where the killer took a shower.
Exactly. And when she asked him why he smelled like her body wash, especially since he hadn't stayed at her house the night before and claimed he hadn't showered there that day, he gave no explanation. He just went dead silent.
Sometimes silence is the loudest confession. And his physiological reactions give him away later, too.
Oh, at the crime scene?
Yeah, when Chad and Velva eventually pull up to the house and see the police tape and the deputies, a responding officer notes that Chad is vibrating with anxiety. He is shaking so violently that Velva, a high schooler, has to look at her 25-year-old boyfriend and tell him to chill out.
Once investigators formally bring Chad into an interview room, his strategy is fascinating. Most innocent people struggle to remember exactly what they did on a random Tuesday or Friday.
Oh, sure, I don't even know what I had for breakfast yesterday.
Right, but Chad, without being prompted at all, delivered a hyper-detailed, minute-by-minute itinerary of his morning.
It's like he's building a fortress out of receipts and timestamps before anyone even shoots an arrow at him. He claims he went to his aunt's workplace to get a breakfast order, then drove to Sonic, and then went all the way home to change his clothes because the weather was, quote, too hot.
Detectives immediately flagged that detail. They pulled the meteorological data for Winsboro that morning. It was a completely mild, overcast Texas spring day, temperatures in the upper 60s to low 70s.
Yeah, nobody's sweating through their clothes at 9:30 in the morning in that weather.
No.
He's over-explaining. He needs a documented reason for why he's wearing different clothes in the afternoon than he was in the morning. But there's a breach in the wall, right? Even with all his careful planning, the math of his alibi just doesn't work out.
The alibi fractured when detectives checked his final destination. Chad claimed he arrived 15 minutes early for a 10 a.m. appointment at an eye doctor, but the clinic staff and phone records painted a different picture.
What did they show?
He actually called the clinic claiming he was having car trouble, and he didn't walk through their doors until 10:20 a.m.
Let's look at the geography and the clocks here. Investigators have him on a surveillance camera leaving his store at 9:21 a.m. He doesn't show up at the eye doctor until 10:20 a.m. That leaves a 60-minute void in his timeline.
And all of these locations, the store, the clinic, the victim's house, are clustered within a really tight geographic radius.
How tight?
The drive from his last confirmed location to the crime scene was approximately 6 minutes. In a 60-minute window, you have more than enough time to make a 6-minute drive, commit a brutal homicide, take a shower, dispose of your bloody clothes, and arrive late to an eye doctor appointment.
Wow. And unlike the weed dealer, when Chad is strapped into the polygraph machine, he fails.
Failing a polygraph, again, isn't admissible in court, but it confirmed the investigators' instincts. What they lacked, however, was the why. Why would this man brutally bludgeon a woman he barely knew? The medical examiner found no physical evidence of sexual assault, though the missing underwear strongly suggested a sexual component or a trophy.
So they needed to understand his psychology, so they dug into his past.
Yeah.
And what they found sitting in the county archives from 2001 is basically a carbon copy of Brittany's murder.
It is uncanny.
I want to transport you back to Christmas 2001 in that same town. A woman we'll call Debbie is asleep in a small, secluded trailer. At 5:30 in the morning, her dog starts going crazy. She hears the crunch of leaves outside, and then a knock at the door.
She opens it to find Chad Carr, and his tactic here is really crucial to understand. He didn't just force his way in. He spun a rambling, frantic story about looking for a coworker who didn't even live nearby, and then claimed he saw a suspicious prowler outside her trailer.
Wow.
Yeah, he manufactured a threat to make himself appear as the protector, convincing her to let him step inside while she gathered her things to leave.
That is a classic predatory manipulation. You invent a danger outside to get the victim to lock themselves inside with the actual danger. Debbie turns her back for just a second to pick something up off the floor, and Chad asks her a question that honestly makes my blood run cold. He says, "Are you sure there's no one else here?"
By getting her to confirm she's entirely isolated, he removes his last hesitation. The moment she says yes, he strikes her in the head.
He bludgeons her with a tire iron, specifically a red rubber-gripped jack handle.
And the forensic profile of that weapon perfectly matches the cast-off patterns and room pathology found in Brittany McGlone's autopsy years later.
Thankfully, Debbie fought back and survived. She required 3 staples in her head. But the aftermath is just as telling. When the lights turn on, the violent predator vanishes, and Chad starts panicking like a child, begging her not to tell anyone because he'll go to jail.
The motive in the 2001 case was exposure. Chad and Debbie were allegedly having an affair, and she was threatening to tell his wife. Chad pled no contest to the assault and went to prison. He was paroled in early 2006.
Just a year before Brittany is killed.
Yes.
And just to round out this profile, the records show he was later convicted for violently assaulting his ex-wife, alongside court filings documenting extreme animal cruelty. So what does this all mean? We have the exact same weapon profile, the exact same MO of isolating a vulnerable woman in a secluded space. How is this not the ultimate smoking gun? How do you not slap cuffs on him immediately?
Well, because a behavioral blueprint is not a forensic reality. A jury needs physical evidence placing him in that specific room. Law enforcement knew this, so they executed a search warrant on Chad's aunt's house, which is where he was living at the time.
And what did they find?
During the search, they recovered a pair of size 5 white women's underwear.
Brittany's mother looked at those and confirmed that was exactly the brand and size her daughter wore. I mean, that has to be the physical bridge, right?
It should have been. But we have to look at the mechanics of DNA collection. By the time investigators secured the warrant and seized the underwear, more than 2 weeks had passed. The underwear had been through a washing machine.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
If they have the actual fabric from the crime scene, does a regular cycle and washing machine really defeat modern forensics?
In many cases involving touch DNA, yes. We aren't talking about a massive bloodstain. We are looking for microscopic epithelial cells, skin cells transferred by the killer's hands.
Oh, I see.
The agitation of a washing machine, combined with the chemical breakdown from laundry detergent, effectively strips those fragile cellular structures from the cotton fibers. The crime lab tested the underwear, but the results were maddeningly inconclusive. No DNA, no blood.
So the physical bridge just washes away. And without that forensic tie, circumstantial echoes, no matter how deafening, aren't enough to secure an indictment without a physical bridge to the scene. The case file just goes cold. It sits in boxes for over a decade, until we reach 2021.
Right, a shift in local leadership changed the momentum. A new sheriff, Kelly Cole, and his captain, Mike Chilson, decided to pull those boxes down and review the cold case.
And they went through all of this again.
Yes. They went through the exact same timelines, the same polygraphs, and the same 2001 behavioral blueprint we just discussed. They determined that the totality of the circumstantial evidence was strong enough to make a move. In late 2021, they arrested Chad Carr for capital murder.
When they finally put the cuffs on him, after 15 years of waiting, Chad's reaction is so strange. The sources note he didn't act shocked. Captain Chilson said he almost seemed relieved.
But the most revealing moment happens when he's talking to the Texas Rangers. Without anyone asking, Chad starts claiming he was, quote, in and out of that house all the time.
He was preemptively building a defense against scientific advances. He even stated, unprompted, "My DNA will not be on that girl or in that room."
He's trying to explain away any trace evidence they might have found using newer technology. But the relief of this arrest is incredibly short-lived. In Texas, a felony charge doesn't just go straight to a judge, it has to pass through a grand jury.
For those unfamiliar, a grand jury is a secret proceeding where the prosecutor presents their evidence to a panel of citizens to determine if there's enough probable cause to go to trial.
Exactly. But less than 90 days after the arrest, this grand jury returns a no bill. They refuse to indict him, the trial is blocked, and Chad walks free.
The letdown there is it's brutal.
The investigators were absolutely floored. They went on record saying that key testimony, including the investigators' own contextual insights into the timeline, was never presented to the panel.
Wait, if double jeopardy doesn't protect him from a grand jury, and they have mystery DNA in the drain, why is he walking free? Are they just waiting for a scientific miracle? Or for someone in town to finally break their silence?
It highlights a critical tension in the justice system. Double jeopardy only attaches after a jury is sworn in at an actual trial. Technically, a district attorney can take a case to a grand jury as many times as they want.
Okay, so why don't they?
Practically and politically, if a grand jury no-bills a case, the prosecutor is highly unlikely to try again unless a massive, undeniable piece of new evidence lands on their desk.
Put yourself in Sheriff Cole's shoes today. You have a mountain of circumstantial data. You have a suspect with a matching violent history, but you don't have the indictment. Do you risk taking it to a second grand jury now and risk another no-bill? Or do you wait? Because we know they're holding one card close to their vest.
Sheriff Cole has been very deliberate with his public statements, but he confirmed one tantalizing detail. They possess unidentified DNA recovered from the crime scene shower drain. DNA that definitively does not belong to Jeff, the stepdad, or anyone else living in that house.
They literally have the ghost's footprints circling the drain.
But maximizing that evidence requires immense strategic patience. Law enforcement is holding back the specific profile of that DNA because they know the heavy burden of proof for a second grand jury attempt will be monumental. The next time they move, the forensic science must be entirely unassailable.
It is an agonizing waiting game for Brittany's family. We are talking about a young, hardworking girl who just wanted to get some sleep after working through the night. She altered her routine one time, and it resulted in a tragedy that still casts a long shadow over that town. If you drive down the highway near Winsboro today, you'll see a massive billboard erected by her family.
It looms right over the passing cars,
Begging for tips, demanding that someone finally break their silence.
That billboard is a stark physical monument to the reality of closed communities. It forces everyone driving by to reckon with the fact that someone among them knows the truth.
It leaves you with a deeply unsettling final thought to ponder. We've spent this time analyzing how a killer can meticulously bludgeon a victim, strip down, scrub their own body, and wash away physical evidence entirely clean in under an hour. But it makes you wonder, if it's that easy to scrub a physical crime scene clean, how much easier is it for a tight-knit community to scrub away the truth through silence over 15 years? What happened to a town's soul when the fear of speaking up outweighs the demand for justice? Keep that in mind the next time you smile and wave at a neighbor.
We'll keep reading the files, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.